She learned very early how easy it was to be forgotten. Not in a dramatic way, not with loud rejection or cruel words, but in small, quiet moments that piled up over time. The kind of forgetting that happens when people talk around you instead of to you. When your name is last on every list, or not written at all. When your presence makes no difference to the room. She grew up in a place where value was measured loudly. People mattered if they spoke with confidence, if they earned more, if they looked impressive, if they demanded attention. She was none of those things. She was calm, careful, and soft-spoken. She listened more than she talked. She noticed details others rushed past, but those qualities were invisible in a world that rewarded noise. At family gatherings, she was the one setting the table, while others laughed in the living room. If someone needed an extra hand in the kitchen, they called for her. If someone needed a favor, they remembered her number. But when conversations turned important, when decisions were made, she was never asked what she thought. Plates could be cleared without her, but choices were made without her too. No one ever said she didn't matter. They didn't need to. Their actions said enough. When she walked into a room, no one paused. When she spoke, people nodded politely and moved on. When she stayed silent, no one noticed the difference. Over time, she stopped trying to be heard. Silence felt safer than being ignored. She worked hard. Harder than most people realized. At work, she arrived early and left late. She fixed mistakes she didn't make. She helped others meet deadlines, often staying behind while they went home. Her name rarely appeared in praise, but it appeared often when something needed to be done quickly. She became reliable, and reliability slowly turned into invisibility. She told herself this was normal, that not everyone was meant to stand out. Someone had to hold things together quietly while others shined. She repeated that thought when exhaustion settled into her bones. She repeated it when she watched others receive credit for work she had supported. She repeated it until it sounded true. But there were moments, late at night, when the truth felt heavier. When she sat alone with her thoughts and wondered why being kind never seemed enough. Why giving more only made people expect more. Why no one ever asked how she was doing unless they needed something from her. She remembered. Birthdays she planned for others that were never returned. Messages she sent that received short replies, if any at all. Promises made to her that were easy to forget. Each memory was small, but together they formed a quiet ache she carried everywhere. She didn't complain. She didn't want to seem ungrateful or dramatic. People already treated her like she took up too little space. She feared that asking for more would make them pull away completely. So she learned to smile through disappointment. She learned to say it's okay, even when it wasn't. In her mind, she tried to understand them. Everyone was busy. Everyone had their own problems. She told herself she shouldn't expect so much. Expectations only led to hurt. So she lowered them again and again, until they barely existed. The world around her moved fast. People chased recognition, approval, success. She stayed in the background, steady and unnoticed. Sometimes she felt like a shadow, present but not seen. Useful, but not valued. Needed, but not chosen. There were days she wondered what it would be like to matter to someone without conditions. To be thought of without being useful first. To be asked how her day was, and have someone actually wait for the answer. These thoughts embarrassed her. They felt childish, like wanting something she hadn't earned. She told herself love and attention were rewards, not rights. And since she didn't shine brightly enough, she must not deserve them. This belief settled deep inside her, shaping how she saw herself. Slowly, quietly, she began to believe she truly had little value. Still, she kept going. She woke up each morning and did what was expected. She helped, she listened, she supported. She showed up even when she felt empty. She believed that if she kept giving, someday it would come back to her in some form. Even if she didn't know how, people around her rarely noticed her tired eyes, or the way her shoulders carried invisible weight. They saw her as strong because she never complained. They didn't realize that strength built from being ignored feels very different from strength built from being supported. She often wondered if her life would look the same if she disappeared for a while. Would anyone notice? Would anyone ask where she had gone? The thought scared her, but it also felt honest. And honesty, even when painful, felt better than pretending everything was fine. She wasn't angry at them. Not really. Anger required energy, and she had learned to save hers. What she felt instead was something quieter. A sadness that didn't cry loudly, but stayed. A sadness that came from knowing you had so much to give, and no one seemed interested in receiving it fully. Yet, somewhere deep inside her, a small part still hoped. Not for attention from everyone, not for applause or praise, just for one person who would see her clearly. One person who would look past the silence and notice the depth beneath it. She didn't know then that such a person existed. She didn't know that the story of her life was about to shift in a way she'd never expected. At that moment, she only knew what she had always known, that to most people, she held little value, and she accepted it. Believing this was simply the role she was meant to play as the days turned into years. The weight of being unnoticed pressed down on her more heavily. It was not a sudden realization, but a slow, creeping understanding. She could see it in the way people spoke to her, in the way they skipped over her presence, as if she were part of the furniture. No one meant to hurt her, yet the absence of acknowledgement was a kind of quiet violence. Every small oversight, every ignored comment, became a small stone added to the pile. She carried in her heart, she remembered moments from her childhood that had shaped her quietly. The times she had tried to join in, to laugh along, only to feel like an outsider. The games she played where others would eventually pair up, leaving her to watch alone. Those moments were subtle, almost forgettable on their own, but together they formed a pattern that lingered into adulthood. She learned early to expect little from others, to lower her expectations so she would not be disappointed, and to hide the longing that grew inside her for genuine connection. At school, it was the same story. Teachers saw her as obedient and capable, yet she never stood out. She completed her work meticulously, helped classmates when asked, and contributed in ways that mattered, but she rarely received recognition. She noticed when classmates got praise for speaking loudly or showing confidence, and she wondered if her quiet diligence was ever seen. She began to equate her invisibility with her worth, and slowly, she believed that being unnoticed meant she was not enough. As she grew older, entering the workforce brought its own challenges. She learned that being capable and dependable could be both a blessing and a curse. Her colleagues relied on her sometimes too much. She handled tasks others avoided, covered for people's mistakes, and stayed late when necessary. Yet, when projects succeeded, her contributions were barely acknowledged. It became a pattern. She gave more than anyone asked, but the world gave back very little. Even in friendships, the dynamic was similar. She was the one who called first, who remembered birthdays, who checked in when people were sick or struggling. Often, she found herself alone when she was the only one who had made the effort. Invitations came irregularly, if at all, and responses to her attempts at connection were lukewarm. She felt the sting each time, but she didn't confront anyone. She told herself that pushing for recognition would seem needy or clingy, that maintaining composure was more important than expressing hurt. She began to internalize the belief that if people did not notice her, it must be her fault. She looked for flaws within herself rather than the situation around her. Was she too quiet? Too slow to respond? Too selfless? Each unanswered message and each overlooked effort reinforced this sense that she was unworthy of attention, even from those she cared about most. And yet she refused to stop caring. It seemed impossible to turn off the part of herself that wanted to give, to nurture, to support. At home, she learned to find solace in small rituals and private joys. She wrote notes to herself, kept journals where she could speak her truth without fear of judgment, and found comfort in music, art, and quiet walks. These became the spaces where she felt seen, if only by herself. Sometimes she would read through old journals and recognize the resilience she had cultivated, though it was a quiet resilience, one not meant for public admiration. She also noticed how her self-worth became tied to her usefulness. She thought that if she could make herself indispensable, perhaps that would ensure people noticed her. She cooked, cleaned, helped organize events, assisted at work without complaint, all in the hope that her efforts would somehow translate into acknowledgement. Often, it did not. She learned that her giving was appreciated for its results, but rarely for what it said about her as a person. She was valued for what she did, not for who she was. There were moments of deep loneliness that she could not easily explain. Sitting in a crowded room, she could feel the distance between herself and everyone else. Conversations flowed around her, filled with laughter and shared understanding that seemed just out of reach. She longed for someone to see her fully, to notice the thoughts and feelings she hid behind polite smiles and attentive nods. Longed for the rare, unguarded connection that most people took for granted. Over time, these longings became internalized into a quiet ache, a persistent hum of sadness that she carried with her everywhere. She hid it well. People often assumed she was content, calm, and strong because she did not complain, because she kept her disappointment to herself. In truth, the ache was always present, lurking beneath the surface, shaping how she interacted with the world and how she allowed herself to hope. Despite all of this, she did not give up on people entirely. She maintained faith that there could be someone who would recognize her, who would value her for who she was, not just for what she did. She learned to be patient, to continue living her life with quiet integrity, even when it felt like no one else noticed. This patience was a form of courage in itself, a decision to keep giving, keep loving, keep existing in a world that often overlooked her. She found small ways to express herself, moments where her inner life could be visible, if only to herself. She journaled her thoughts, painted small sketches, composed music, and allowed herself to dream in secret. These moments reminded her that her life had meaning beyond external validation, that her worth was not solely determined by the attention of others. They were private victories, but victories nonetheless. Even though the world continued to overlook her, she grew in quiet strength. She learned to navigate relationships carefully, understanding that people's inability to see her did not diminish her reality. She learned to find joy in her own accomplishments, however small, and to celebrate her own resilience. Over time, she began to see that her value was not contingent on recognition, that she could be worthy simply because she existed and because she continued to give, even when the world did not notice. Yet the longing for recognition, for someone to truly see her, never disappeared entirely. It remained a quiet companion, shaping her hopes and desires, even as she learned to live with the ache of invisibility. This longing would later become pivotal, because it prepared her for the moment she would meet someone who would recognize her fully, someone who would see her as more than invisible, more than useful, more than overlooked, someone who would value her not for what she did but for who she was. And so she continued, carrying her quiet strength alongside her persistent ache, walking through a world that rarely acknowledged her existence. She gave, she loved, she helped. She hoped in the smallest corners of her heart that one day the world, or at least one person, would see her. That day was not yet here, but the foundation was being laid quietly and steadily, like the slow, persistent growth of a tree, unnoticed by the passing world. She had almost given up on expecting anyone to truly notice her when he came into her life. At first, she didn't think much of him. He was quiet too, observant, someone who moved through the world with a calm presence. But there was something different in the way he looked at people, the way he noticed small things that others overlooked. And when he looked at her, she felt it immediately, a subtle shift in the air, like someone had finally turned their eyes to her when she had been standing in the shadows for so long. Their first encounter was unremarkable on the surface. Perhaps it was in a hallway at work, or maybe in a quiet corner of a library. She couldn't remember exactly, but the moment left a lingering impression. He spoke to her as if she mattered, asking questions that showed he was listening, that he cared about her thoughts and opinions. No rush, no assumptions, just attention. It was startling in its simplicity, because she had grown used to being ignored over time. She noticed patterns in his behavior. He remembered the small details she had shared in passing the book she wanted to read, the story she had told about her childhood, the particular way she liked her tea. Each memory was like a tiny acknowledgement, a thread weaving, a connection that had been missing from her life for years. She found herself looking forward to these moments, a quiet anticipation that felt foreign but comforting. He never tried to dominate the conversation or push his opinions onto her. Instead, he listened. He listened with genuine curiosity, asking follow-up questions, sometimes repeating what she had said in a way that showed he understood. She realized slowly that he valued her not because she was useful or entertaining, but simply because she was herself. There was no expectation for her to perform, no demand for her to prove her worth. Just the simple recognition that she existed and mattered. At first, she felt hesitant. It had been so long since anyone had shown this kind of attention that she wasn't sure she deserved it. She questioned his motives quietly in her mind, waiting for the moment when he would see her as ordinary or inconsequential, like everyone else. But the longer he paid attention without judgment, the more she realized that this was different. This wasn't fleeting or conditional. This was genuine recognition. There were times when she caught herself analyzing every gesture, every word, as if trying to detect the hidden meaning behind his kindness. But slowly, she let go of the doubt. She noticed that he didn't change his behavior regardless of the situation, whether others were present or not. He treated her the same when they were alone and when they were in a group. That constancy was a new experience for her, and it began to reshape the way she thought about herself. He seemed to have a way of noticing what others overlooked. He pointed out things she had thought were too small to matter, the way she laughed quietly, the care with which she organized her work, the empathy she showed to people who didn't notice it. With each acknowledgement, she felt herself becoming more visible, as if the fog of invisibility surrounding her was slowly lifting. For the first time in years, she began to speak without fear of being dismissed. She shared thoughts she had kept to herself, feelings she had buried, experiences she had never told anyone. He listened without interruption, without making it about himself, without turning her words into something to exploit or ignore. The space he created allowed her to explore herself in ways she hadn't dared before. She felt heard, understood, and slowly she began to believe that her presence had value. The small moments built into something larger. A shared laugh, a conversation that lasted longer than it needed to, a walk where words were not necessary, but the company felt comforting, treated her with a consistency and attentiveness that she had never experienced. Even in silence, she felt acknowledged. Even in ordinary moments, she felt important. It was not the grand gestures or dramatic declarations that marked their connection, but the quiet, steady recognition that she existed and was enough. She started noticing the effect his attention had on her life. It wasn't just that she felt valued by him, but that she began to see herself differently. The invisible weight she had carried for years felt lighter. She smiled more freely, spoke up when she had an opinion, and allowed herself to hope that being seen by one person could be enough to begin healing the long-held pain of invisibility. At work, she found herself more confident. When he complimented a project she had completed or asked her opinion during a meeting, it wasn't about flattery, it was acknowledgement that she had contributed meaningfully. Colleagues began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. She walked a little taller, spoke a little clearer, carried herself with a quiet assurance that had been missing. They didn't know the source of this change. They simply noticed that she seemed different. Among friends, she began to engage more fully. The validation she had longed for wasn't dependent on their recognition anymore. That knowledge allowed her to participate without fear of being ignored. She discovered that when she believed in her own value, others' oversights mattered less. It didn't erase the past, but it created a space for her to move forward. Their conversations delved deeper over time. He asked about her dreams, her fears, her regrets, and she answered. She shared stories from her past, from the years when she had been overlooked, when she had felt invisible. He didn't judge or pity her. He simply listened and acknowledged her experiences. This acknowledgement was powerful, because for so long no one had cared enough to truly hear her story. She realized that what he gave her was not just attention, but trust. He trusted her to be herself, to express herself fully, without fear of rejection. And in return, she found herself trusting him, opening parts of her heart that had been closed for years. The trust between them was mutual, quiet but profound, and it became a foundation for a connection that felt rare and precious. The more she saw him, the more she recognized that her perception of worth had been shaped by the wrong people. All the years she had spent trying to prove herself, trying to be noticed by those who could not see her, had created a distorted understanding of value. He showed her that worth is not always measured by external recognition, but by the sincerity of someone who sees you for who you truly are. There were times she still struggled with doubt, moments when she questioned whether she truly deserved the attention he gave her. Old habits die hard, and the years of invisibility had left deep marks. But each time she wavered, he reminded her gently, without words at times. Simply through his presence and consistent acknowledgement, his belief in her became a mirror, reflecting a value she had long denied in herself. She began to notice other changes too. She started to pursue interests she had abandoned, taking small steps toward passions she had shelved because she didn't think they mattered. She began to speak more openly in meetings, share her ideas with friends, and assert boundaries when necessary. His recognition had not changed her circumstances, but it had shifted how she interacted with the world. She carried herself differently because she knew, finally, that someone valued her for who she was. And that made her believe that she mattered in other spaces too. Their connection was not about grand declarations or public attention. It was about the quiet assurance that one person truly saw her. And in that assurance, she began to heal. She realized that it wasn't about being everything to everyone, or being noticed by all, or earning constant approval. It was about being seen by someone who mattered, someone whose perception could validate her in ways the world never had. She began to understand that her life had meaning beyond the approval of those who had overlooked her. She started to nurture the parts of herself she had hidden away, the creative spark, the thoughtful mind, the compassionate heart, and every time he acknowledged these parts of her, she felt stronger, more grounded, more certain that she could reclaim the space she had long believed was not hers to occupy. In time, she noticed that the change wasn't just internal. Others responded differently to her presence, not because she sought their validation, but because she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from being truly seen. There was a lightness to her step, a calm in her voice, a warmth in her interactions that made people listen. They might not have recognized the source of the change, but the world began to notice a shift, subtle but real, radiating from a woman who had learned that being valued by the right person could illuminate her entire life. Through him, she discovered that the act of noticing and valuing someone is transformative. It is not just a kindness or a gesture. It is a recognition that can reshape the way someone sees themselves. And for her, after years of feeling invisible, it was nothing short of life-changing. For the first time, she believed that she could be more than the sum of overlooked moments, that she could step into her own light, and that she could exist fully without apology. Without the need for constant external validation. As their connection deepened, he began to show her a level of support and understanding she had never experienced before. It was subtle at first, a word spoken when others overlooked her, a gentle gesture when she hesitated, a quiet defense when someone dismissed her ideas. She noticed these actions and felt a warmth that spread slowly through her. Like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky, she had been conditioned to believe that standing up for herself would be futile, that defending her worth was pointless. Most people had ignored her, dismissed her, or expected her to remain silent. But with him, she felt safe to exist fully, to express herself, to make her presence known without fear of ridicule or rejection. He never made her feel that her confidence was arrogant or unnecessary. He simply validated it, showing through his actions that her voice mattered at work. There were moments when colleagues would undermine her contributions or question her abilities. In these moments, he was there, not loudly, not aggressively, but firmly and unwaveringly. He acknowledged her ideas, repeated them to ensure they were heard, and gave credit where it was due. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about standing beside her, reinforcing the truth that she was capable and deserving of recognition. She began to see that she didn't have to fight alone anymore. Friends and acquaintances also began to notice the shift in her interactions. She no longer hesitated when expressing herself. She laughed more freely, spoke with clarity, and carried herself with quiet assurance. The change was not about becoming someone different. It was about being seen as she truly was, with all her strengths and vulnerabilities intact. His support acted like a mirror, reflecting back to her the worth she had always carried but had been denied. Acknowledgement. He also recognized the subtle ways in which the world had diminished her over time, the small dismissals, the overlooked contributions, the habitual undervaluing. He named these things gently, not to dwell on the past, but to make her aware that she had endured more than she realized. By naming the patterns, he validated her experiences, showing her that the problem had never been her, but the way others had failed to see her. This realization was freeing, and she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders in their private moments. He encouraged her to speak about her aspirations, her fears, and the dreams she had long suppressed. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that prompted her to explore herself more deeply. She realized that his presence was not about directing her life, but about holding space for her to grow. With him, she began to reclaim a sense of agency, discovering that her thoughts and feelings deserved attention and that she could pursue them without guilt. One day, a situation arose where her abilities were publicly questioned in a meeting. Normally, she would have shrunk, stayed silent, and allowed the criticism to pass. But this time he stepped in, not to attack anyone or create conflict, but to ensure that her work was acknowledged accurately. He pointed out her contributions with clarity and fairness, and in doing so, he gave her the courage to speak up as well. That moment became a turning point. She realized that she no longer had to accept invisibility. When she had an ally who genuinely valued her, his support extended beyond professional boundaries. In social gatherings, when others made dismissive remarks or overlooked her, he ensured she was included, introducing her ideas, bringing attention to her presence, and highlighting her value in subtle yet meaningful ways. It was not about proving anyone wrong, but about creating a space where she could exist fully without constantly questioning her worth. She began to notice that the more he supported her, the more she believed in herself, and the more others naturally responded to her presence through his actions. She learned an important lesson. Value is not about quantity of recognition, but quality of acknowledgement. One person who truly sees you can change the way you interact with the world, can validate your efforts and affirm your identity. It was a revelation she had longed for in the quiet corners of her life. She realized that being recognized by the right person could give her the strength to reclaim her own voice, confidence, and sense of self-worth. Over time, she began to assert herself in ways she never had before. She started sharing her opinions more openly, expressing her needs clearly, and setting boundaries that she had once felt unable to enforce. His support had given her a model of what healthy recognition and encouragement could look like. She no longer needed to shrink to fit the expectations of others. She could stand tall, knowing that her presence had intrinsic value. Even in moments of doubt, when past experiences tried to convince her that she was unworthy, he reminded her through his actions that she was enough. She began to internalize these lessons, gradually shifting from dependence on his validation to self-assurance rooted in the truth of her own capabilities and worth. It was a slow process, as old patterns do not disappear overnight. But each day, each supportive gesture, each acknowledgement, strengthened her sense of self. The bond between them also showed her the power of loyalty and consistency. He did not praise her only when convenient or when it benefited him. His recognition was steady, unwavering, and unconditional. This constancy became a source of security, a foundation on which she could rebuild her confidence. She began to trust not only him but also herself, learning that the world could be navigated with grace and integrity without the constant need for external approval in private. He encouraged her to pursue passions she had abandoned. He asked about her hobbies, her interests, and the dreams she had set aside. With gentle persistence, he helped her remember that her life had dimensions beyond her obligations to others. She began to explore these areas again, finding joy and fulfillment in activities that had once been sources of happiness before the weight of being overlooked dimmed her enthusiasm. She also began to notice how his support affected the way she viewed relationships more broadly. She understood that true value is not found in constant praise or superficial admiration, but in consistent recognition and respect. She started to evaluate her interactions with others differently, distinguishing between those who truly saw her and those who merely tolerated her presence. This discernment was empowering, allowing her to invest her energy in people, in spaces where she was appreciated, and to let go of those that diminished her. As the days passed, she realized that being defended, valued, and supported was not an indulgence. It was a human necessity. The years of invisibility had taught her endurance, but they had also shown her the cost of neglect. With him by her side, she was learning the transformative power of genuine acknowledgement. She began to see that her worth was not dependent on the judgments of the world, but on the truth of who she was and on the recognition of those who truly understood her. The moments of support he offered were not dramatic or performative. They were acts of quiet courage and steady faith in her value. In standing by her, he modeled the kind of treatment that she deserved and allowed her to experience it firsthand. She saw that loyalty, consistency, and genuine care could reshape one's life in profound ways. It was not about changing her identity or elevating her above others, but about affirming that her presence, thoughts, and efforts mattered. Through his unwavering support, she began to reclaim her life. She spoke more freely, acted with confidence, and allowed herself to feel the pride of her accomplishments. She no longer measured her worth by the neglect of others, but by the acknowledgement of those who truly mattered. She began to understand that value is not something bestowed by the masses, but something recognized and nurtured by those who genuinely see us in every small act of defense, acknowledgement, and encouragement. He gave her a gift that words alone could not convey. He showed her that she was worthy, that she mattered, and that she could exist fully without fear of dismissal. She realized that the past years of being overlooked had not diminished her intrinsic value. They had only obscured it. With his steadfast presence, she could finally step into the light and claim her place in the world with quiet strength and newfound confidence. And so, with each passing day, the bond between them grew deeper. His actions continued to show her that being valued is transformative, that support and recognition are not trivial, and that even one person who truly sees you can change the course of a lifelong burdened by invisibility. She began to see herself not as the person everyone had overlooked, but as someone deserving of care, attention, and respect. And in that recognition, she found the courage to be fully herself, unafraid, and unapologetically present in every space she entered. She had spent most of her life believing that her value was determined by others, and that she was destined to be overlooked. Years of neglect and indifference had shaped her understanding of the world and herself. Yet, through the unwavering presence of one person who truly saw her, she began to realize that worth is not given by the masses, but recognized by those who genuinely notice and respect us. As time passed, the impact of his recognition deepened. She found herself waking up with a sense of purpose she had not known before. Simple tasks that once felt burdensome now held meaning. She prepared for her day not just out of obligation, but with the quiet knowledge that her presence mattered. She felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of being invisible, because she had finally been seen in a way that mattered every day. She reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. She thought about the countless moments of being overlooked, the people who had never acknowledged her, and the times she had questioned her own worth. She realized that these experiences had shaped her resilience and her empathy, but they had also been painful. Through the recognition of one person, she began to separate the truth of her value from the neglect of others. She discovered that being valued by someone who truly understands you changes the way you perceive yourself. It is not about needing constant praise or approval, but about the quiet assurance that your existence and your efforts are meaningful. This recognition allowed her to embrace herself fully, flaws and all, and to see her life not through the lens of neglect, but through the light of possibility. Her relationships began to shift as well. She approached interactions with others from a place of confidence and self-respect. She learned to assert her opinions, express her needs, and establish boundaries without fear. She no longer tolerated indifference or dismissal because she had experienced the power of genuine acknowledgement. People began to notice the change in her demeanor, a calm assurance, a quiet strength. a presence that demanded respect without demanding attention at work. She no longer hesitated to share her ideas or take initiative. The confidence she had gained from being valued by someone who truly saw her gave her the courage to step into spaces she had once avoided. She found that her contributions were now recognized more naturally, not because she sought validation, but because she carried herself with the quiet certainty that she mattered. Her colleagues responded differently, as if her belief in herself had changed the energy around her. She also began to pursue personal passions that she had long abandoned. Hobbies, interests, and dreams that had been set aside due to self-doubt and external neglect resurfaced. With his encouragement and the affirmation of her worth, she allowed herself to explore these areas without guilt or hesitation. Each step she took toward reclaiming her passions reinforced the understanding that her life had meaning independent of others' recognition. In her private moments, she reflected on the transformation within her. The sadness that had lingered for years, the quiet ache of invisibility, had not disappeared entirely, but it had been softened. She no longer measured her value against the indifference of others. She had learned that true worth is recognized by those who matter and affirmed by oneself. This understanding became a source of inner strength and peace. She realized that being seen by the right person could illuminate a life in ways that years of neglect could not dim. The moments of laughter, shared silence, and mutual respect between them became the foundation of a new understanding of self. She understood that she was deserving of care, attention, and recognition, not because she had earned it through usefulness or charm, but because she existed fully and authentically. The impact of his presence extended beyond their relationship. It changed the way she interacted with the world and how she allowed others to interact with her. She no longer felt the need to shrink herself to fit the expectations of those who had previously overlooked her. She stood, taller, spoke with clarity, and engaged with people from a place of authenticity rather than compliance. The quiet confidence she carried made her interactions more meaningful and genuine. She also began to appreciate the subtle ways in which support and recognition can transform lives. It was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments, but about consistency, attentiveness, and genuine care. Each time he acknowledged her thoughts, listened to her concerns, or celebrated her achievements, she felt a deepening sense of worth. These small but consistent acts of recognition had a profound cumulative effect, reshaping her understanding of herself and her place in the world. As she reflected on her journey, she realized that the years of neglect had not been in vain. They had taught her resilience, patience, and empathy. But the experience of being truly seen had taught her an even more important lesson, that worth is intrinsic. An acknowledgement from the right person can help uncover it. She understood that she had always had value, but it had been obscured by the indifference of others. With this realization, she began to embrace her life fully. She allowed herself to dream, to hope, and to pursue opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. She nurtured her relationships with those who treated her with respect and authenticity, and she let go of those who diminished her. She recognized that her value was not dependent on universal recognition, but on the acknowledgement of those who truly mattered and on her own understanding of herself. The transformation was not sudden, but gradual, built through countless small moments of recognition, support, and care. She began to see herself as more than the sum of overlooked experiences. She saw herself as a person worthy of love, respect, and attention. She realized that being valued by one person who genuinely sees you can catalyze a profound shift in self-perception and life trajectory. Her journey also deepened her empathy for others who felt unseen. She became more attuned to the quiet struggles of people around her, recognizing the subtle signs of neglect and invisibility. She understood the transformative power of acknowledgement and sought to offer it to others in meaningful ways. Her experiences allowed her to be present for those who needed to be seen, creating a ripple effect of validation and care in the end. She no longer needed to measure her worth against the standards of those who had overlooked her. She understood that value is not something to be earned through effort alone or proven to a critical world. It is inherent, and it can be recognized and affirmed by those who truly understand and care. With this understanding, she found a sense of peace and fulfillment. that had long eluded her. She recognized that life is not about the approval of everyone, but about the meaningful recognition of those who matter, and the acknowledgement of one's own inherent worth. She embraced herself fully, unafraid to occupy space, to express her thoughts, and to engage with the world authentically. The ache of invisibility remained a distant memory, softened by the profound realization that she was valued, seen and appreciated in ways that truly mattered. And so, she stepped into her life with quiet confidence, carrying the lessons of the past alongside the validation she had finally received. She knew that her worth was real, enduring, and independent of those who had once failed to recognize it. The presence of someone who saw her fully had not only transformed her, the understanding of herself, but it also opened the door to a life lived with authenticity, self-respect, and the profound joy of being truly valued, even after she had begun to feel valued and seen. Life continued to test her in subtle ways. Not everything changed overnight. Some people still overlooked her. Some opportunities passed unnoticed. And there were moments when old doubts crept back into her mind. But now, armed with the understanding that her worth was not determined by others, she approached these moments differently. She no longer felt diminished by neglect, nor did she let small slights define her sense of self. Instead, she met these challenges with patience, clarity, and quiet strength. She found that being truly valued by someone had taught her how to value herself. She began to make choices that reflected her own needs and desires, rather than always catering to what she thought others expected. She allowed herself to say no without guilt, and to pursue yes without hesitation. The liberation of recognizing her own voice was profound. She realized that the years spent being ignored had not been wasted. They had given her empathy, resilience, a depth of understanding that now guided her interactions with the world and her career. She began to take more risks, exploring projects that had once intimidated her. She proposed ideas with confidence, knowing that even if some were dismissed, her value was not tied to external validation. Her colleagues began to see a new presence in her, a person who could be relied upon not just for diligence, but for insight and creativity. The recognition she had longed for flowed naturally, not because she demanded it, but because she carried herself with an authenticity that others could not ignore. She also deepened her relationships outside of work. Friendships that had felt one-sided became more balanced, as she no longer accepted neglect as a given. She reached out to those who showed care and understanding, and she distanced herself from those whose presence had been draining or dismissive. It was not about revenge or punishment. It was about preserving her energy for people and experiences that honored her value. She learned that the way others treat us is often a reflection of their own limitations, and it should never dictate how we perceive ourselves. In moments of quiet reflection, she thought back to the long years of invisibility. She acknowledged the pain she had carried, the countless times she had tried and felt unseen, and the patience it had taken to endure it all. But now she saw that this history had shaped her into a person of depth, empathy, and insight. Her experiences of being overlooked had given her the ability to appreciate genuine recognition and to recognize it when it appeared. She no longer saw her past as a series of failures, but as a foundation for the strength she now carried. Her life became richer as she embraced her passions and interests with renewed energy. She returned to activities she had abandoned, pursued learning opportunities, and explored creative outlets. Each small step reinforced her sense of agency and self-worth. She discovered that the joy of engaging in what she loved was amplified. When it was done without the constant need for external approval, she found satisfaction in the act itself and in the awareness that her contributions had intrinsic value. The relationship that had sparked this transformation remained central. Though it was no longer about dependency, he continued to value and support her, but she had learned to anchor her self-worth internally. Their connection became a partnership of mutual respect and understanding, a space where both could thrive without fear of diminishing each other. She realized that the most meaningful relationships are those that allow both people to grow and to be fully themselves. She began to notice how this internal shift influenced every area of her life. Decisions that once felt paralyzing became opportunities for exploration. She approached challenges with curiosity rather than fear, and she allowed herself to embrace change instead of resisting it. The confidence she had gained from being seen and valued had ripple effects that transformed her interactions, her choices, and the way she carried herself in the world. She also became more attentive to others who might be struggling with invisibility or neglect. Her experiences had given her insight and empathy, and she found herself offering support, listening with patience, and noticing the quiet strengths in people that others often overlooked. She understood that even small gestures of recognition could have profound impacts on someone's sense of self. She began to cultivate these moments intentionally, creating a network of understanding and care around her. Her growth was not linear. There were days when she felt vulnerable, when old insecurities whispered that she might not be enough. But she faced these moments with the tools she had developed over the years. She reminded herself of her intrinsic value, the recognition she had earned and experienced, and of the truth that being overlooked by some did not diminish her worth. She learned to hold space for these emotions without letting them control her actions or self-perception. She also explored new avenues of connection and collaboration. With the assurance of her value, she found courage to join groups, engage in projects, participate in communities that she might previously have avoided. Her voice, once hesitant and subdued, became an instrument for expression, contribution, and leadership. People responded not just to her abilities but to the authenticity and presence she radiated, qualities that had been nurtured through years of patient self-discovery and support in her personal life. She cultivated joy in simple moments. She noticed the beauty in ordinary experiences, the satisfaction in completing tasks that aligned with her values, and the comfort in quiet moments of reflection. She allowed herself to experience happiness without reservation, understanding that her joy was not contingent on external approval. Each moment of genuine contentment reinforced the truth she had come to embrace, that her life had meaning and her presence mattered. She became a model of resilience and self-respect to those around her. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances began to recognize the transformation, noticing a woman who had endured years of invisibility and emerged with strength, grace, and clarity. Yet, she did not carry this as a badge of pride. Instead, she held it as a quiet acknowledgement of the journey she had taken. Understanding that her growth was a continuous process, she also reflected on the importance of patience and timing. The recognition and validation that had been missing for so long did not arrive all at once. It was built through consistent presence, genuine understanding, and careful attention from the right person. She realized that meaningful recognition cannot be forced or hurried. It must come from sincerity and alignment of perception. This understanding helped her approach relationships and interactions with a greater sense of discernment and intentionally. Her experiences reinforced a vital truth. That self-worth is discovered both through internal reflection and through the acknowledgement of those who truly see us. She understood that while external recognition can spark transformation, the ultimate foundation of value comes from within. She embraced this balance, nurturing her self-respect while appreciating genuine acknowledgement from those who mattered in her life. She also found fulfillment in helping others, their own worth. Her journey had given her insight into the pain of invisibility, and she now used her experiences to uplift and support those around her. She noticed when someone was overlooked, validated their contributions, and offered recognition without expecting anything in return. In doing so, she created a ripple effect of care and acknowledgement, extending the lessons she had learned to the lives of others. Ultimately, she realized that life is not about universal recognition or constant approval. It is about authenticity, self-respect, and meaningful connections with those who recognize and honor your true value. She had learned that her worth was not diminished by neglect, and that being seen by even one person with genuine care could illuminate a lifelong shadowed by invisibility. With this understanding, she embraced her life fully. She pursued her passions, nurtured her relationships, and approached challenges with confidence and grace. She allowed herself to be present, to express her thoughts and feelings openly, and to enjoy the moments of life without fear or hesitation. The journey had not been easy, but the lessons she had learned had transformed her, giving her the courage and clarity to live a life rooted in self-worth, authenticity, and profound appreciation for the value of genuine recognition. And so, she moved forward with quiet strength, carrying the wisdom of her experiences alongside the confidence she had cultivated. She knew that her life had purpose, her presence had impact, and her worth was undeniable. Each day became an opportunity to live fully, to honor herself, and to extend the acknowledgement and care she had received to others. She had discovered the transformative power of being truly seen. And with that power, she embraced a life of meaning, authenticity, and enduring self-respect.